Imagine waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. Your food literally has no taste.
Oh, yeah. That absolute pit in your stomach feeling.
Exactly. And like your employees think you're lying to them.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, sitting there in the dark, you think they might actually be right.
It's terrifying. Your anxiety just metastasizes into self-hatred.
Yeah. And your guts boil so much you feel like you're physically going to spit blood. Now, you'd think this is the story of a catastrophic failure, right? But this is what success actually feels like for a CEO.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, our mission is to explore the brutal, unfiltered reality of leadership. We're looking through the experiences of Ben Horowitz in his book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
Right, because most business books just offer you this, polished, predictable recipe for success.
Oh, totally. Like you build a product, you scale, you IPO,
Yeah,
neatly tied with a bow.
exactly. But this deep dive is about what you do after that neat formula completely shatters. Like, what do you do after you've already screwed up?
Okay, let's unpack this because Horowitz calls this phase the struggle. And I love that capitalization. The struggle.
Yeah, it's a phase that every founder, and really, every leader inevitably hits. It's the playbook for navigating the chaos when literally nothing goes according to plan.
I just can't get past this one thing, though. If the struggle is this miserable, if it literally makes you feel like you're going to spit blood, why does anyone willingly sign up to be a CEO?
Right. Why fight for a job that guarantees misery? Well, it's because the goal isn't the misery itself. It's about what the fire of that struggle actually produces.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, Horowitz actually leans on Karl Marx here, who said, life is struggle. He fundamentally believes the struggle is the only place where true greatness is forged. It's the crucible.
So to really understand how anyone survives that kind of bone-crushing pressure, we have to rewind.
We do. We have to look at his extremely unorthodox background. It wired his brain completely differently from, your typical corporate executive.
He definitely did not have a standard Silicon Valley country club upbringing. He grew up in what was affectionately known as the People's Republic of Berkeley.
Right. He was a red diaper baby.
Exactly. His grandparents were card-carrying communists. His grandfather actually lost his teaching job during the McCarthy era.
Wow.
So from day one, he's surrounded by this philosophy of the far left. He's looking at the world through a prism that is deeply, deeply skeptical of traditional power structures.
And that environment taught him incredibly early lessons about fear and judgment, like the danger of taking things at face value.
Oh, the childhood story with Roger.
Yes, it's such a brilliant story in the book. So he's this terrified, shy kid, and there's an older neighborhood boy named Roger. Now, Roger struggled with schizophrenia and had a very dark, unpredictable side.
Yeah, a scary situation for a little kid.
Extremely. One day, Roger dares young Ben to walk down the street, demand a red wagon from an African-American kid named Joel, spit in his face, and hurl a racial slur at him.
Talk about an impossible, terrifying position. He's terrified of Roger beating him up if he disobeys, but he's also terrified of confronting this other boy unprovoked. He's trapped.
He really is. So Ben walks down the block, his heart pounding out of his chest. But when he gets to Joel, he doesn't do what Roger demanded.
Right, he doesn't spit or yell.
Exactly. Instead, he just opens his mouth and asks Joel if he can have a ride in the wagon.
Which is amazing.
It is. And Joel says yes. They end up playing all day, and Joel eventually became his lifelong best friend. He was actually the best man at his wedding.
That is incredible. And that one decision basically defined his worldview. Like it taught him that feeling terrified doesn't make you a coward.
No, not at all. Every leader feels fear.
Right. It's what you actually do in the face of that fear that determines who you are. Action supersedes emotion.
And, it also taught him not to judge things by their threatening surface. He carried that refusal to judge a book by its cover into his personal life, too.
Like the blind date story.
Yes, his blind date with his future wife, Felicia. So the day before the date, Ben gets into a massive basketball brawl with a frat boy who was wearing camouflage pants.
As one does.
Right. And he ends up with this horrific black eye. So he shows up to this blind date looking like a literal thug.
Felicia's first thought was, coming here was a huge mistake, which is a perfectly rational response to a guy arriving with a swollen, bruised face.
Totally rational. But neither of them relied on that jarring first impression. They took the time to dig beneath the surface and actually understand each other. And, I mean, they've been married for decades now.
That specific trait, looking past the ugly surface to find the underlying value that translates directly to his early career.
It absolutely does.
Because he eventually finds himself working at Netscape, interviewing with the co-founder, Mark Andreessen. And at the time, Andreessen is, what, only 22 years old?
Yeah, 22 years old, but he possessed this dizzying encyclopedic knowledge of technology history.
A total genius. Horowitz realized that instantly. Right. But calling their relationship intense would be the understatement of the century.
Oh, for sure.
Right before a massive product launch, Mark leaked the entire strategy to the press behind Ben's back.
Which is just wild.
Right. Ben was furious. He sent this sarcastic email saying, I guess we're not going to wait to launch.
To which Mark replies, and keep in mind, he CCs the CEO and the chairman of the company on this history. He says they were getting killed in the market, the product was worse than the competition, and that it was entirely Ben's fault.
And doesn't he end the email with something brutal?
Oh, yeah. He ends it with, next time do the fucking interview yourself. Fuck you.
Wow. Reading that email when you have a wife, 3 kids, and a desperate need for your paycheck, that must have been heart-stopping.
Oh, no doubt.
But here's the thing. Most business relationships would completely shatter after an email like that. It's the ultimate stress test. Why did this one survive and actually lead to a 2-decade partnership?
Well, it survived precisely because of that brutal, unfiltered honesty. I mean, think about how highly effective people communicate.
Okay, how so?
Horowitz notes that most business relationships fail in one of 2 ways. They either become too tense to tolerate, or they become too polite and complacent to be productive.
Ah, I see.
Yeah. Mark and Ben lived in the extreme tension. They constantly challenged each other's thinking. They upset each other almost every day by hunting for flaws in the other's logic.
So that friction stripped away the ego and forced both of them to be sharper.
Exactly. They built an absolute immunity to hurt feelings if it meant getting to the truth.
And that resilience was immediately put to the test when Horowitz stepped into the CEO role himself, right?
Right. He and Mark founded LoudCloud, which was a pioneer in cloud computing.
They raise massive amounts of money, hire hundreds of people, build this incredible momentum, and then boom, the dot-com crash hits.
And it wasn't just a minor market dip. The NASDAQ Q drops 80%.
80%.
Imagine your entire customer base just evaporating. All their startup clients were literally going bankrupt overnight.
And the press completely savaged them. Businessweek ran an article calling LoudCloud the IPO from hell.
Yeah, and Red Herring magazine essentially accused them of taking investors' cash and lighting it on fire in the parking lot.
Ouch. Horowitz writes about the agony of knowing his employees were going home to their spouses, and the spouses were saying, I just read in the news that your CEO is an idiot.
It's heartbreaking. But the financial math was even more terrifying.
How bad was it?
They were forced to take the company public into this totally dead market with literally only 3 weeks of cash left in the bank.
3 weeks? That is insane.
Right. And to even make the IPO mathematically possible, they have to execute a painful 2-for-1 reverse stock split.
Okay, so mathematically, a reverse split doesn't actually change your net worth.
Yeah.
It just halves your share count to artificially boost the stock price so you look stable enough to IPO.
Right. It's like trading 2 $5 bills for one $10 bill.
But psychologically, it is devastating. To an employee who dreamed of owning 10,000 shares and suddenly logs into their account to see 5,000, it feels like the company just reached into their pocket and robbed them.
Oh, people were furious. His own in-laws attended the company meeting and had to listen to employees openly trashing him.
But they pull off the IPO, they barely survive, they reset their revenue guidance, lay off 15% of the staff, and just when it seems like the bleeding has stopped, the floor collapses again.
Yep. Their absolute biggest customer, Atriox, which owed them $25 million, files for bankruptcy.
It's the ultimate nightmare scenario. They are definitively doomed. So Horowitz realizes the only way to avoid total corporate bankruptcy is a desperate, massive pivot.
Right. He secretly initiates something called Project Oxide.
Which was a masterstroke of survival.
It really was.
Yeah.
LoudCloud was a hosting business, which requires massive cash to run servers, but they had built incredible proprietary software to manage those servers.
So Project Oxide was the secret plan to rip their internal software out from the cloud business.
Exactly. It allowed them to sell the heavy, cash-burning cloud computing division, including the employees, to EDS for $63.5 million.
They basically amputated the biggest part of their body to save the brain.
Yes, and they kept the high-margin software, rebranded as a software company called Opsware, and just managed to keep the lights on.
This kind of endless compounding crisis brings up a concept in the text that perfectly captures the startup experience. WFIO. Reflect. It's over.
WFIO. It's an agonizing phase that nearly every successful company goes through, usually 2 to 5 times.
Wow, 2 to 5 times.
Yeah, it's the moment where the CEO looks at the landscape, runs all the models, and sees absolutely no way out.
It sounds like hitting extreme turbulence in an airplane. As the pilot, how do you focus on the road and not the wall when the wall is rushing right at you?
You have to adopt a philosophy that feels entirely cold-blooded at first. Horowitz points to a conversation he heard between legendary football coach Bill Parcells and Raiders owner Al Davis.
Oh, this is a great story.
Yeah, Parcells was complaining about all the injuries his team had, outlining all the totally valid, logical reasons why they might lose the upcoming game. And Davis just stares at him and says, "Bill, nobody cares. Just coach your team."
Nobody cares. It hurts to hear, but it is the absolute truth of leadership.
It really is.
When the engines fail, the media doesn't care, your investors don't care, your employees don't care about your excuses.
Exactly. Your excuses, no matter how valid, a macroeconomic collapse, a dot-com crash, a massive customer bankruptcy, none of it preserves a single dollar of runway or saves a single job.
Right.
You have to spend 0% of your time on what you could have done or why life is unfair, and 100% of your mental energy trying to find the one seemingly impossible way out.
So if surviving requires 100% focus on solving the problem, how do you get your team to focus with you? Because a leader's first instinct in a crisis is usually the exact opposite, right? They want to shield their team from the panic.
Right. Horowitz calls this the positivity delusion. It is the most common trap for well-meaning leaders.
You feel the weight of the company on your shoulders, so you try to protect your team from the bad news. You accentuate the positive to keep morale high.
But he shares this eye-opening story about talking to his brother-in-law, who was a telephone lineman for AT&T.
What happened?
Horowitz asks him if he knows a specific senior executive at the company. And the brother-in-law says, "Yeah, I know him. He comes by about once a quarter to blow a little sunshine up my ass."
Wow.
Yeah, that was the light bulb moment for Horowitz. He realized he was doing the exact same thing to his own company.
He was withholding the terrifying news, thinking he was keeping spirits high.
Exactly. But the reality is, employees aren't stupid. They knew the product had issues. They knew they were losing deals.
Let me challenge that, Tim. It is philosophy, though. If you stand in front of the whole company and announce that you're getting your asses kicked and might run out of money, isn't that the equivalent of yelling fire in a crowded theater?
You'd think so.
Why doesn't that brutal honesty just trigger a mass exodus of your best employees?
Because of the psychological mechanics of trust. When a CEO lies and says everything is fine while the ship is taking on water, employees don't believe them.
They just assume the CEO is either totally oblivious to the impending doom or actively trying to deceive them.
Right. Both conclusions completely destroy morale. If you withhold the truth, you destroy trust. And if you keep the existential threats a secret, you are the only person in the building trying to solve them.
Ah, so you need maximum brains on the problem.
Exactly. If the product is failing, the engineers need to know the exact details so they can fix it. Bad news has to flow fast and freely.
This shift in communication marks the transition from what he calls a peacetime CEO to a wartime CEO.
And the contrast is stark.
It really is. A peacetime CEO aims to expand the market. They tolerate deviations to encourage creativity. They build consensus. They rarely raise their voice.
But a wartime CEO is fighting for the company's life. They're completely intolerant of deviations from the survival plan.
No time for consensus.
None. They do not have the luxury of consensus building. And as Horowitz notes, sometimes they use profanity purposefully to shatter complacency and heighten the urgency.
Pure survival mode.
Yeah.
And it completely changes how you approach competition. There's a concept here that I love. Lead bullets versus silver bullets.
Oh, this is crucial.
When LoudCloud was fighting for its life, they faced this massive existential threat from Microsoft. Microsoft started giving away a web server that was 5 times faster than LoudCloud's, and they were giving it away for free.
Free and faster. That's terrifying.
Right. There, Horowitz and his executive team frantically started looking for a magical silver bullet to solve it. Maybe a flashy acquisition, maybe a clever marketing partnership to outmaneuver them.
But an engineer named Bill Turpin sat him down and delivered the hard truth.
What did he say?
He said, "Ben, those silver bullets are fine, but our web server is 5 times slower. There is no silver bullet that's going to fix that. We are going to have to use a lot of lead bullets."
Meaning, put your head down, do the hard, unglamorous, exhausting work, and just build a better product.
Exactly. There is no magical escape hatch. You have to walk through the front door and fight the ugly guy blocking it.
And building that wartime army means you have to eventually apply this brutal honesty to the absolute hardest part of business, the human beings.
Yeah, managing people is the hardest part. Horowitz frequently quotes his old boss at Netscape, Jim Barksdale.
He used to say, take care of the people, the products, and the profits in that order.
Right. And taking care of the people often means making excruciating decisions, like layoffs.
Oof, layoffs are brutal.
They are. The book makes it incredibly clear that if you execute layoffs incorrectly, you will permanently break your company's culture.
The people who survive the cuts will never trust you again.
Precisely. The golden rule of layoffs is absolute. Managers must fire their own people.
You cannot outsource it to human resources.
Mm.
You cannot bring in a slick consulting firm to do the dirty work, like George Clooney's character in the movie Up in the Air.
No, you can't. If an employee gave up their nights and weekends to work hard for you, you owe them the basic courage to look them in the eye and do it yourself.
And the CEO has to address the entire company and take personal responsibility.
Yes. You can't use corporate jargon like, we're cleaning up performance issues. You have to stand there and say, the company failed to hit its plan, and it is my fault.
This exact philosophy applies to the executive level, too. When you have to fire a high-level executive, Horowitz argues you shouldn't view it as an executive failure. You have to view it as an interview or system failure.
Right, because you hired the wrong person for the scale the company is currently at.
Which means the failure is on you. And the advice he got from his legendary mentor Bill Campbell on this is brilliant.
Yeah, Campbell told him, you cannot let them keep their job, but you absolutely can let them keep their respect.
That is so crucial. Don't trash an executive on their way out to make yourself look better.
Because the best employees they managed are watching closely to see how you treat people on their worst days.
Now, on the flip side of firing is hiring. And Horowitz emphasizes a strategy that feels very counterintuitive. Hiring for strength rather than a lack of weakness.
It's a vital distinction for a wartime CEO. A typical consensus-driven hiring process usually weeds out candidates with glaring weaknesses, which sounds good on paper,
Sure.
but it also inevitably weeds out people with extreme spiky strengths because they make people uncomfortable. You end up hiring someone who is broadly mediocre.
And in wartime, you don't need well-rounded. You need someone who is world-class at the exact singular thing required to survive.
Which brings us to the Mark Craney story. It is just incredible.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Horowitz desperately needed a head of sales to save the newly formed Opsware. He interviews this guy named Mark Craney.
And Craney does not fit the Silicon Valley central casting mold at all.
Not even a little bit. He's a square-shaped guy in a tailored suit who proudly announces he went to the MIT of Southern Utah.
Which was his awkward way of breaking the ice, but he was so incredibly intense it just made everyone in the room uncomfortable.
But when Horowitz pushed past the weird surface and asked him about sales training, Craney pulled out a massive manual. He started explaining the mechanics of enterprise sales, like Isaac Newton explaining the laws of physics.
He's a total savant.
But the reference checks. Horowitz calls 75 different references, and they generally check out. But then he gets a backdoor reference from someone who saw Craney speak to a group of brand new sales hires.
Oh, this quote is wild.
Craney literally looked at these fresh recruits and told them, I don't give a feck how well trained you are. If you don't bring me $500,000 a quarter, I'm putting a bullet in your head.
Yeah, that's intense.
Okay, from an HR perspective, this is an absolute nightmare. It goes against every modern HR rule. How do you balance a cultural misfit with the desperate need for a specific genius?
It all comes back to the wartime CEO mentality. Every single member of the board and the executive team voted against hiring Craney.
Every single one.
Yes. But Horowitz knew they were at war. He didn't have the luxury of time to worry about appropriateness or soothing hurt feelings. He needed a general who could rip market share away from competitors.
So he hired Craney, despite the extreme glaring weaknesses, because Craney's singular strength was the only thing that could save the company from bankruptcy.
And Craney ended up completely revolutionizing their sales process and saving the business.
But what I love about Horowitz's leadership style is that he didn't just hire people and expect them to magically know what to do. He heavily invested in training.
And he insists that training is the boss's job. It is not HR's job.
Right. It's one of the highest leverage activities a manager can possibly perform.
He breaks down the simple math of it. If a manager spends 12 hours preparing a specialized training course for 10 employees, and that training improves their performance by just 1%, That yields 200 hours of improved productivity over the next year.
That's a massive return on investment. He was so fanatical about this that he wrote a legendary document back at Netscape called Good Product Manager, Bad Product Manager.
Just to set a baseline of expectations.
Yeah, simply because he was frustrated that nobody actually knew what their job was supposed to be.
And providing that absolute clarity of expectation is what ultimately transforms a chaotic, terrified startup into a functional, winning organization.
So all of this relentless struggle, the near bankruptcies, the devastating layoffs, the painful pivots, the brutal honesty, it eventually culminated in what Horowitz calls the end of the beginning.
Yes, against all odds, he rebuilt Opsware into an absolute powerhouse and eventually sold it to Hewlett-Packard for $1.65 billion in cash.
$1.65 billion. It's an unbelievable triumph.
It really is.
But the ultimate lesson he took away from the entire ordeal wasn't a neat formula for success. It was the stark realization of how incredibly alone, terrified, and fundamentally untrained he was as a technical founder trying to be a CEO.
He realized that the entire venture capital ecosystem was designed to replace technical founders with professional, seasoned CEOs, rather than actually helping the founders learn how to do the job themselves.
So he and Mark Andreessen teamed up once again. They took everything they learned from the struggle and started their own venture capital firm, A16Z.
And their founding motto was perfectly aligned with their journey: some experience required.
Meaning they firmly believed that to properly advise founders through the darkest days, you needed to have actually founded and run a company yourself.
Right. Their primary goal was to teach technical founders the crucial CEO skills they desperately lacked, the exact skills Horowitz had to learn the hard way through the fire.
It's a profound way to pay it forward.
Yeah.
We started this deep dive talking about that cold sweat, the sheer terror of waking up in the dark, realizing the rosy startup dream has become an absolute nightmare.
The crushing misery of the struggle.
Yeah. And as we've seen through every phase of his journey, there is no magic formula. There's no silver bullet to make the hard things easy. You have to use the lead bullets. Which leaves you with something to really mull over. Since there is absolutely no playbook for navigating the hardest things in life or business if no one is coming to save you and the excuses don't matter, is the ultimate measure of a leader simply the raw, irrational refusal to quit when everyone else would?
It's a powerful question. It's what every leader eventually has to answer for themselves when they're sitting in the dark and the turbulence hits. Will you focus on the wall, or will you focus on flying the plane?
Think about that the next time you find yourself facing your own WFIO moment where there seems to be no way out. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.